I've been involved in over 7 reconstructions of just the clay reconstruction type. I've done hundreds of composite sketches involving suspects or persons of interest in various crimes, everything from murders to sexual assaults to thefts and the like. And in those cases, I would say there's a identification rate, or the sketch or the reconstruction has resulted in an identification in approximately 40% of the cases. Nationally, there was a survey done and they found that in just 3D reconstructions generally result in some type of identification in over 60% of the time. The reconstruction actually begins back at the scene when the remains are recovered. The people who recover the remains generally document how they found the remains. For example, the clothing that the person was wearing can be indicative of the size of the person, which is important when you're doing a reconstruction. From there, the medical examiner will make a determination of the person's ancestry, their gender, their age estimate, their size, weight, for example, height. All of these play an important role in what the forensic artist does later with the remains as far as attempting to make a resemblance of the person. The next step would be to take the skull, have it cleaned, place tissue markers on the skull. These tissue markers are depth markers that tell us the size of the person's face, for example, how much tissue they should have on their face. Then a forensic photographer will take pictures of that person's skull, and then the actual artist will get involved and do a 2D reconstruction or a 3D reconstruction. The depth markers, which are the markers that are placed directly onto the skull, showing the size of the tissue in that particular portion of the skull, have been developed well over 100 years of study. Researchers have studied cadavers and they've figured out that for a person of this type of age, this type of race, this gender, this is the general amount of tissue they will have at that point on their skull. So we use these generalized amounts and we place them at particular points on the skull. And then we use these markers as guidelines as far as how much clay we should add to the skull. In the end, what we end up with, this 3D reconstruction, it's based on bone structure of the skull itself. So the skull is telling me how large to make the nose, or the skull is telling me how wide to make the eye orbit, or the cheeks, how large to make those. So in the end, the skull tells us what this person's face looks like, because everybody's skull is as unique as that person is. That's why people appear different to us. So in the end, it's the skull directing, and then certain features, for example, the goatee, slight mustache, those I know existed because I was able to tell that based on what the people at the recovery scene had done, as far as photography and the notes that they had taken. So knowing that, I'm able to add that into the equation. I think it's very important that the public realize that they shouldn't focus on a single feature of this reconstruction and say, well, because of that feature, this can't be so-and-so. There may be some slight differences in the particular features, the eyes, the nose, the mouth. There may be a scar missing that you don't see because I didn't know that scar existed. I couldn't tell that based on the bone structure. But the most important thing is, overall, that face resembles someone that they recognize. That's the recognition we're looking for. When that person gets identified, I think it's ultimately very satisfying for everyone involved in the process. Through the identification process, we've actually helped to basically return to this person what they had, which was their name, and get this person back to their loved ones or their family who are probably wondering what happened to them. That's why I do this.